Hello, good morning to everyone from London. My name is Sam McCarter. It's a pleasure to see so many people from all over the world, including the UK, and as far away as Vladivostok, as I've just noticed. I'm going to be talking basically, obviously, about IELTS this morning. And what I'm looking at is tips for motivating your students in their IELTS preparation from a particular perspective. This is a brief overview of the abstract that you may have already seen. This is a shortened version. And basically what I'm trying to do is to think about getting students to do some practice on their own, and also to motivate them to do this, and maybe to revise their work at home rather than just doing endless practice tests, getting them to read by themselves, etc. And this is a tall order for all of us as teachers, myself included. I'm still teaching IELTS, and I started teaching IELTS in 1995 in November, so it's, I think, 19 years now. So we are going to go on to the next slide. Now, I think for me, from my experience over the years, we can talk about language and grammar, etc., with students and concentrate on a bottom-up approach for IELTS teaching. However, IELTS is a test of competence, i.e. a test of students' skills, not just language testing. So it's language in use rather than language knowledge, and that is actually quite a big jump for many students if they've come from EFL or ESOL into IELTS and academic English. And what the perspective I want to take here is looking at a way of getting students to be more aware of the certain elements of using the language. And I'm going to expand on some of the points that I've got below. The first thing here is organization. I think part of the problem with students is that they don't know maybe why, in many cases, why they're doing the IELTS exam. Yes, for an exam, yes, but what is beyond the exam? University and real life. So, in effect, it's a certain types of life skills that students need generally for operating in English as a second language or third language, as an academic language, not just in learning grammar and vocabulary. So the thing is to gradually build up the overall organization, while at the same time adding in the language and vocabulary. They are very important, but they are part of the they are the knowing, and it is the using that we need to build up. We also want to get students to see links and relationships between the grammar and vocabulary and the skills that they're using, so that the grammar and vocabulary are not just learned for themselves, they are dictated by the tasks. And also, as all parts of the exam, whether it is the reading or the writing or the speaking, that there are certain stages and frames and templates that students need to know. And this applies, as we'll hopefully see, in primarily in reading and writing, but in speaking as well. So students know what the purpose is of what they're doing, then they can build up greater awareness of the different parts of the exam. One way of helping them to do this is for them to think of looking at the language from different perspectives. I'm looking at the IELTS from the perspective of organization. So it's an organizational take. And if you think about perspectives, the item on the next entry on the slide, personal is a perspective, national is a perspective, economical is educational. So if students are able to organize their knowledge and their vocabulary and their ideas on the different perspectives, these can be recycled again and again. And the perspectives that we need to know in IELTS are limited by the types of subjects that students encounter in the academic world. And you have to think of the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, maths, then business and the arts. So you can look at things from the scientific, the technological, the engineering, the mathematical, the business, financial, economic perspective, as well as the personal perspective. The thing about IELTS is that IELTS is more abstract. The only part of the exam that is personal is the beginning of the speaking, and part one of the speaking and part two, and then the speaking part three becomes more abstract. The reading is abstract, the writing is abstract, and the listening is primarily abstract. So getting students to move away from the personal to the abstract, but using their own experience, this is part of the jump and part of the problem. In the writing, it says students can use their own experience. This means that they can take the any experience that they have and make it into abstract concept. For example, students in EFL might be talking about hobbies. I like playing sport, etc. Turned into a more abstract idea. Sport is good for you. Sport improves people's health. We there have a sporting perspective, a health perspective, along with cause and effect. Very, very simple build-up of awareness. And you can't just tell students, even at advanced level, all this information at one time. We need to build this up. And we need to then, if we're doing language and say reading, we're doing cause and effect, problem solution, and we're looking at how students can navigate text moving around these blocks of information. Then we can look at the language that goes with it. Rather than going from the language to the skills, go from the aspects of the language into the skills into the aspects of the language, and then see how we can transfer what is in the reading into the writing, the speaking, and the listening. And if we do this gradually, we can build up an awareness of what the exam is. And students you can set little tasks using perspective, etc., and relationships and links, as we'll hopefully see in a second. I'm now moving on to the next slide. Now, I've titled this Organization 1. I'm starting here at the top. I'm taking a top-down approach. Again, I'm not saying that grammar and vocabulary are not important, but it's a way of getting students to see things so that when they go outside the classroom, they will maybe start making connections in the world around them. And very, very basic sequences in our world, past, present, and future. And if you think about this, we can look at this from different angles. From the point of view of reading, we can see that in the past you might have something that was causing any problem. This has an effect. And then you have the future, which is a solution. Even pointing out something as simple as this to students breaks up a text. It becomes less of a jumble of 750 to 900 words. It becomes 3 blocks. And those of you who are very familiar with the exam will have seen reading passages where it is organized just around cause, effect, and solution. The effect can come first, the cause can come second. And then if you think about it, we have a lot of general and specific. You have the general information at the beginning, followed by the specific information. This is paragraph organization, you have topic sentences, and then you have the specific backup information. And you can see the relationship here between the reading and the writing. If students are able to make this connection between both of these skills, then they can hopefully do so in their speaking. So just little bits of awareness of how information fits together. Further said that words have friends, and words then form collocations. But you can take this further in that collocations of friends, they form blocks of language. These blocks of language then become larger blocks, and you have then these relationships between past, present, and future. And you can play around with this. You don't have to do this for every piece of writing or speaking or reading, but you build up an awareness that students can take away with them into the outside world. Now, I'm going to, the next two slides are basically a continuation. This is organization too, but at a different, lower level, looking at the organization that you'd find in the reading passages: exposition, argumentation, historical, biographical. That is basically the limit. We're not going to get heavy case studies in IELTS reading. It's general academic texts where they've got explanation, opinion, and historical, biographical. And you can see how these elements here have text features, but we can call them essential elements, as I've called in a book with a colleague of mine, Edward de Chazal, which is in the reading list at the end. And these are the types of elements that you'll find in text. Well, you see time relationships would be in historical, biographical. It may be in other parts. It also, you could have cause and effect in either argumentation or explanation. So they all fit in to different types of text. It's recognizing these elements when they appear, because cause and effect does not always appear with one grammatical constructor. This is where you build in the grammatical structures and vocabulary, so students can then begin noticing and seeing the various elements through the grammar and vocabulary, and then bringing them, lifting them up above the words, so students see the meaning above the words themselves, which then helps them to navigate and read not just in IELTS, but in their academic world. Now, these are a few more examples here, and this list is a construction from the IELTS research reports by Cyril Weir, and it's quite an interesting article. These are available online. You can Google it. And you also is an amalgamation of some information from Jordan as well, again mentioned at the end. Now, if you look at these, you can see that these are very common elements, processes and sequencing: definition, explanation, exemplification, and generalization and specificity. Now, if you get students to recognize things like cause and effect, exemplification, you can get students to think, where do these elements, where do they occur in paragraphs? Examples generally occur in the middle of paragraphs. So therefore, it's easy for students to be, when they're looking at reading, to begin to search for specific information. The more general stuff occurs around the beginning and at the end, not always in the first sentence. Topic sentences in paragraphs in IELTS can occur maybe second or third sentence. So it's important that students see and notice what topic sentences are, and not rely on first and last sentence in the in looking at paragraphs. Apparently, 53% of paragraphs in IELTS reading have the topic sentence at the beginning of the paragraph. In academic world, it is higher, because what we do is we state and prove, and then you relate this to students' writing. Where do they put the topic sentences? Where do they put the exemplification? Then if you can think about generalization and specificity, if we think about, again, about topic sentences and the specific information, think of the paragraph headings and the sentence completion. This tells you how the exam is organized. It helps students to navigate their own reading. It may make them read a bit more and notice things a bit more. If you do this with their writing, you look at task 1, students tend to well, unless they're taught how to organize the answers, they tend to make a list of the specific information in data in task 1 or in maps or processes, and they have difficulty doing generalizations. This is probably the most difficult part of task 1. Then when it comes to task 2 and in speaking, part 3, students tend to overgeneralize and do not put specific examples and reasons. And this is, the brain works in different ways, so this is why we need to transfer. We need to get students to see, look at what these writers are doing. You need to copy this in some way, and it's copying the organization. They then see the relevance of exemplification and organizing information in the writing and in the speaking, and then an awareness of the reading. So, what I'd say here is that what we are trying to do in many cases in the IELTS, or even indeed in the academic world, is reorganization. And this is taking the language the students know and reorganizing it, getting them to think of ideas from different perspectives and looking at structures of paragraphs and looking at organization, so students can deal with blocks of information, blocks of ideas and sequences of information, remembering that ideas and elements follow certain patterns. And if you think about when we are explaining and looking at opinion, we have cause and effect sequences because we want to back up our information by saying this happens and then this happens because of this, and then which in turn blah blah blah. So we want to build up not just vocabulary that allows the cause and effect sequencing to take place, like the verbs result in, result from, create, produce, but also relative clauses and lexical cohesion, this idea, this step will. And then we can get students to organize their ideas in limited perspectives. I mentioned this before, but if you think about it, students do have a lot of ideas. If you say to students, well, I don't know anything about this, and then you say to them, well, what about looking at this from the technological point of view, looking at it from the educational, the social, the personal, the economical, the economic, the financial. And you see that in the cultural, traditional, you see that these are things that are to do with noticing the organization. When students are preparing for writing for task 2, you can get them to look at the perspective, look at the writing from different perspectives. You can give them a list initially, or you can get them to create their own. You can even do it with task 1, so students see the purpose of doing the task 1. Why is this graph or this piece of data done, presented like this. It's to show maybe a rise in the number of small businesses. This is from a financial perspective, and it's just very light touch. In your reading, after you've done a reading passage, before you do the questions, you could ask students to go through and maybe map a paragraph or map a whole text, looking at different perspectives. Now, sometimes part of reorganization, it's very easy to get bogged down in things. I would say light touch and build up gradually. You're taking students away from the words and thinking about the meaning and organization. It then can lead to an increase in speed because students are able to hover above and look down, and you will see students suddenly making suggestions and seeing the organization. But it's not going to happen overnight. For some students, it's just automatic. But if you want students to do things, I would say that you have put time limits on any kind of task, even a short task. Say, okay, you've got 2 minutes to do this, you've got a minute. That takes away the focus from you onto the time. And then the students who are maybe less reluctant to do things will be pulled along by the time. Make students who are maybe a bit lazier work with students who are more active. They then pull them along because they don't want to be falling behind. This can be even teenagers and more advanced adults. So don't be afraid of using a stopwatch. I stopwatch everything. I say to my students, you have a minute, you have 2 minutes, you have 3 minutes, and I want an answer by then. Their body language changes automatically. Just as I have got a time constraint on doing this and a certain number of slides, then we fit the task to the time, as well as fitting the task to the purpose, etc. So you can use the mobile phone. You don't have to use a stopwatch, but it's worth trying for everything, and don't let things slip away. Noticing and prediction. I was giving a talk recently, and somebody in the group, it was a group of about 90 teachers and students. Most of them are teachers, but some of them are students, advanced students. And one of them said, because I said you have to build the skill of prediction, and we predict using what is outside. We can also take what's inside the classroom to reinforce what's outside. You see, what I'm trying to build up here is we notice what's going around in the language, we notice what's going around in the world outside, we try and bring it together. If I use two metaphors here, one metaphor is like the GPS system on a car. Students maybe can drive the car, but they don't know where they're driving it to. They switch on the GPS, are connected to the world. We as teachers need to make students aware of the connections between what they're doing and what they know and what is out there in the real world. And the more we make these connections, the better it is for our students. But they need to notice. Noticing is a very important skill in the academic world, and it can lead to prediction. So it's not just the metaphor that I'd want to mention about the GPS. If we think of the universe is made up of different types of matter. They say that the stars and the planets, etc., are 15% of all matter, and that the rest is made up of dark matter. And the thing is, it's a bit like IELTS. The students see the vocabulary and the grammar, and they are worried about how they can put this together. It's your job and my job as teachers in order to shine a light onto this dark matter so the students can make the connections between the grammar and vocabulary. This is it's very, very important for us to shine this light. We shine the light by getting students to notice the generic vocabulary. I've mentioned the vocabulary before with cause and effect, etc. We want to see collocations that are repeated again and again. If you look at the academic word list, there's the academic word list by Avril Coxhead, which the reference at the end. You can Google this. If students know the academic word list, it gives them another 500 odd words. But if they know the word families with these words, it gives them another 3,000 words. So if students are about, say, 5.5 post-intermediate-ish, high B2 in their IELTS preparation, they would know about roughly, depending on which expert you're talking to, between 2,000 and 2,500 words, which will give them about 83 to 85% coverage of any text. If you add the academic word list and the word families, it gives them another 3,000 words, which gives them about 88 to 90% coverage. You notice that this is a large chunk of words, but the jump in comprehension awareness does not increase with the words, it increases with the skills. So it's not really just about learning more vocabulary, it's about relearning and looking back at the previous vocabulary. And the other word list I mentioned is the AKL, which is the Academic Keyword List by Magali Paco, which is also mentioned. She's at Louvain in Belgium, UCL in Belgium, and it's a much more extensive word list, and her it's from her PhD. It's very, very readable, the book. So if we can get students to notice the collocations, the structures of paragraphs, the skills, and looking at the skills as they navigate cause, effect, problem, solution, the things I've already mentioned, they can build up their ability to predict. Prediction is not guessing. Prediction is using what students know. Now, we would always get students saying, oh, but I can't insert information from my own knowledge into the reading, etc., etc. No, in the interpretation of the question, but students need to use what they already know. They need to be able to build on their knowledge of the skills of the organization in order to navigate texts. And if you think about it, IELTS is one huge collocation, and I mean huge. If I say to you, cause, then you think of effect. If you think of problem, solution. So students can start predicting organization from the title. A passage used, it's in one of the IELTS books, is the impact of wilderness tourism. I use this as constantly as an example because the impact tells me that this passage is about an effect of wilderness tourism, tells me that it is the cause. So I know that this passage is about cause and effect. And I need to use this as I navigate the headings and the information. There are 3 sections in this particular reading passage. The last section is solution. Well, I know solutions come at the end, so I know that cause and effect has to be the first or second section. I look at the questions. The questions will confirm. The questions will match the passages. One way of getting students to think about reading and doing things on their own is in the class to do IELTS reading passages without questions, getting students to look at the reading passage and say to you, well, work in groups and come up with what they would test if they were IELTS examiners. And you'll be very surprised. Do it yourself and then match what the students come up with. I've done this with students and teachers, and the answers were identical. So then you think, well, then why do we have these certain types of questions? then you see that the questions match the passage. You then can give students another passage with a title, a title and the questions without the passage, and say to students, okay, what's the structure of this passage? So students can navigate back and forward. It's building up an awareness that they can then take away from them into other parts of the exam. So, I'm back to information sequences here with links and relationships. What I want to do is develop this further. I mentioned collocations, and I'm going to add colligations. We have common phrases like in cause and effect, like play an important role in, have an impact on. The colligation here are the prepositions at the end and the and at the beginning. These are very common words and very common phrases. And getting students to see how words fit together, not individual words, but chunks and collocations that relate to the essential elements like classification, cause, effect, and problem and solution. We can then get students to maybe build up ideas. Again, we get students saying, "Oh, I don't know how to come up about ideas about a particular subject." But you can give students a word. I'm going to use the word technology in a minute. A word like technology, and say to students, "Well, what words?" Make a list of words in individually or in pairs that are related to the word technology, and maybe take them a while to come up with words. It can be adjectives or anything. Technology could be exciting, it could be waste of time, could be laptop, iPad, seminar, webinar, and then students start building up and they suddenly realize, well, I know all of these ideas, I know all of these words, so word association, and then you can build it up to phrase association, idea association. And the problem is that when we say brainstorming to students, we tend to say, "Oh, come up with ideas," but ideas are made up of long strings of words, like the impact of technology on people's lives in central London, for example. Quite a long idea. Whereas in technology, lives, positive, negative, things like that, are easier to start with, and then students can construct word phrases from that, words and phrases and noun phrases. So a way of building students' confidence to show that they know a lot of information. It's about reorganizing. Now I'm going to jump a bit because I'm conscious of the fact that I've about 8 minutes left. So if we can move on to the next slide, we're continuing with links and relationships too. I've used this many times with my own students, and I started doing this because I was teaching with a group of advanced professionals. I teach health professionals, and I teach by video from my flat in London to Manchester in the north of England. You will know Manchester from Manchester United, etc. And I was talking about something with one class, and I made a very simple link between the information, 2 bits of information, and the student didn't get it. And I was quite taken aback, and this keeps happening again and again. Now I'm not surprised, but I was talking again. I'm going to use the word technology, and because it's health, let us use the second one here, health. And the student couldn't see the connection. Then when I explained it, and it happened again in the same class, and I suddenly realized maybe this is part of the problem in students when they come to write and when they come to speak. They don't see the connection between certain ideas. And if you go back and look at, say, reading passages that students get in the IELTS, and look at true, false, not given statements, you will notice that the statements are based on the connection between two bits of information. It's rare there's more than two. This happens because of this. Technology is worthwhile. I'm shortening this. You've got the technology and you've got the evaluation. Technology is linked to with certain health problems. You see technology and then the linking and health problems. Technology has a huge impact on the economy. So you can see here how we can test information. The testing in the IELTS is generally about seeing how things are related. And if you go through again and look at multiple choice questions, stem, cause, 3 or 4 effects, depending on whether it's listening or reading, or cause, 3 or 4 effects, depending on whether it is listening or reading. And then you get students seeing that how the questions are constructed. You could give this information, this slide, the next one I'm giving you, and just get students to look at these two aspects: technology and games, technology and freedom, technology and health or growth, and say to students, okay, can you make as many ideas related to this as possible? You could even extend this to other things. You can then say to students, well, isn't it interesting that you could put transport with economic development? You could put food with economic development, education with economic development, sport and economic, cars and economic development. So you can take any of these and put any of the so you have cars and transport, cars and food, cars and education, cars and sport, cars and technology, and see if students can make connections or negative connections, or we always think about things being positive. We can say that it doesn't have. So you see what I'm trying to do is to get students to make connections with what's around them. Now I've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to look at relationships here using perspectives. If we're moving an IELTS from the personal to the abstract, we're moving away from what is personal to us, which may be then, on another perspective, familial, social, local, regional, national, international, global, and look at how there's this development away from the speaker towards the more abstract, and we can go from international back to the personal. So we can get students to relate things along a continuum, and we can build this up to help them to locate sorry, the information in their own lives and organize it. I'm going to jump here to this slide about questioning. And this is what I'm going to have to end with, because I've got 40 minutes, and this is where I will perhaps end. 4 minutes left. You can put technology at the center and use the different essential elements that I mentioned earlier: effects, time, comparisons, process, and types, and get students to make their own connections. So they can make questions. What types of technology are there? Organize the different types of technology into groups. What is the impact of, or what are the effects of technology? And if you notice here that we are building not just questions that organize the vocabulary and the skills and the grammar, etc. These are questions that organize the questions for task 2, and also organize the questions for speaking part 3, but also there are questions that we can use as a way of predicting the content of a passage. I've got loads of lists of these. I could only put on one example here, but it is it's a very good thing. So on a day when it's raining or when it's sunny or the photocopier breaks down, stick the word technology in front of on the middle of the board, and then either organize your information according to the essential elements of effects, time, process, or comparisons, or whatever you want to do, or organize it according to transport, growth, design, etc. And so the students are getting a kind of almost microscopic view, because what they're doing is they are looking in at the problem from different angles, make your lives much easier, and will make the students' lives much easier. It actually makes it fun, because sometimes doing a class with one word, this could take you an hour and a half if you're doing speaking and writing combined. I think we might be able to go on to the next one. So use the students, and here you see that all of the effort has been put on the students. They then come up with the ideas. It helps them to see the value of what they know, gives them a chance to speak rather than us imposing. Education is about taking out, not always about putting in. Students know a lot, reorganize, allow them to speak. And a very simple technique, for example, in task 1, which is something I did yesterday, I gave my students the graph, which was on small businesses, how they've developed in recent years in e-commerce. And I said to them, okay, 2 minutes to study. After 2 minutes, you ask me the questions, not me asking you. And it was quite interesting, because even though they were advanced, they were not used to going in a different direction. They were used to me giving them the information, but were not used to coming at it from a different angle. It's the traveling along one street in one direction and then going along another street, the same street in a different direction. We don't always recognize it, and this is perhaps the part of the problem in IELTS. Skills require two-way movement, transfer back and forwards across skills, whereas knowing may just be monodimensional, and what we need to do is make things multidimensional. I think I'm going to have to stop there because of time and the next speaker coming along. I hope some of this is relevant to you, and start playing. Don't let IELTS control. You do the controlling. Okay. Thank you very much for listening, and I think I'm going to hand you over to Henry again.